Welcome everyone. My name is Harry Boyle. I work at Impacts Asset Management as a portfolio specialist. Just to give you some context around the water industry and why it's a particularly important investment field for the wider market. I think the most important thing to bear in mind is that the global population is going to expand quite rapidly from about 7.5 million people to about 9 billion people by the end of kind of 2050. And then potentially by the end of the century, that number might be 11 or 12 billion people. And yet in that time period, so over the next 80 years, the amount of freshwater drinking resources will remain fixed. And that is approximately 2.5% of all the water on the planet is available as drinking water. So you are seeing a tremendous growth in the demand for our freshwater drinking resources, and yet supply will remain constant. So that is a huge kind of thematic driver for the importance of investing in and around the water theme. And then on top of that, you have very, very high leakage rates. So most water systems within the globe, certainly in the Western world and in our beautiful cities across the planet, they were designed to last probably 75, maybe 100 years. And so we are overdue a massive spending or capex cycle. So that is manifesting in how much water gets wasted or feeds out of the system. And then thirdly, you've got the challenges of climate change. So as more extreme weather events start to hit various different parts of the world, that is going to put pressure on your water resources. So we've seen droughts in California. I think the first major drought that really stressed their water system was around 2008, and it ran for a long period of time, and it created a variety of interesting water innovation businesses. We then had Cape Town in 2018, that was probably about a week away from running out of water altogether. And then more recently, we've had Chennai in India, a city with, I think, 11 or 12 million people that lives in, two massive reservoirs. Again, they virtually ran dry, and that encouraged profiteers to start selling water at very, very inflated prices. So those issues, those kind of tensions between supply and demand are occurring with greater and greater frequency. And some of that relates to climate change. And unfortunately, if you were to look forward, you would imagine those types of incidents will increase with greater frequency. When we think about investing in the water space, we would divide it into three distinct areas. One is water infrastructure investing, one is water treatment and efficiency investing, and finally, the third is investing in and around water utilities. In order for a business to come into our investable universe, it needs to have 20% exposed to one of those three areas. And then within kind of water infrastructure investing, one of the big consumers of that 2.5% of freshwater resources is the agricultural sector. And we have a holding within our strategy that allows farmers and the agricultural sector to be much more targeted and specific about where a piece of land, agricultural land, needs water. So rather than putting too much water and kind of drowning the crops in specific areas, you can use technology to be much, much more targeted. On the infrastructure side, a huge driver is, unfortunately, that we are moving from the countryside and into cities, and that is putting great pressure on our existing water infrastructure systems, sewage and water treatment facilities, our network of pipes, our kind of bioenergy resources, all of that, as more people move from the countryside and into cities, is going to come under strain. And then in terms of treatment and efficiency, I would say the most important thing to get right is the testing and monitoring side. And I think what COVID-19 and the global pandemic has shown us is that we really need to know down to a kind of microbial level what is in our food and what is in our water. So in order to use this precious 2.5% of water correctly, we need to test it, clean it up, reuse and recycle. And that can be done almost an infinite amount of times, but you have to make sure that you know what's in the water before you start treating it. So testing and monitoring is very, very important. And we have 2 or 3 healthcare businesses within our fund that specialize in that field, and they have done very well. And then finally, you've got the distribution of water resources. That's traditionally done either by a publicly listed or private company or a government-sponsored company. And again, getting that balance right between a fair price for the water, but continuing to invest in the water infrastructure supply is very important. And I think governments are waking up to how they unpick that particular problem. Just by way of example, the type of business that you might see in a water strategy or a water portfolio is a Swiss industrial company. And this serves as a very, very good example because the core of what it does was not traditionally water related. It was founded 120 odd years ago, and they made the cast iron components for industrial processes, but they found their way into creating metallic water pipes first that could be laid and help distribute clean water, and that helps in disease prevention and are more efficient and less costly. This particular business has deep experience doing this type of thing. And just to conclude, I think why are we particularly excited about the opportunity within the water space? I think a lot of it relates to what I talked about up front, which is this fragile balance between supply and demand is only going to intensify as we move into the next decade or the next 2 to 3 decades. And I think governments are slowly waking up to the fact that we have to do better with the water resources that we have, given that demand is going to intensify. So with that in mind, governments are also thinking that by investing in infrastructure, they can stimulate the economy. There are dual benefits. So it's been very interesting that as large infrastructure spending plans have started to move through the political systems, whether that's in China, in Europe, or the Americas, and we are literally talking in the last 12 to 18 months, that water infrastructure spending has been very prominent in terms of where they want to spend money. And that is to attack leakage rates and to ensure the quality of the water for the consumer and the business remains very, very high. It's the infrastructure or reconciliation bill within the United States has not been absolutely finalized yet, but the water-related spending is going to be between about 80 and $120 billion, there or thereabouts. Thank you very much for your time.